The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
Community microgrids are the most cost-effective way to proceed in terms of building out the energy system of the future and deliver this unparalleled trifecta of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, distributed energy for local communities. My guest today is Craig Lewis. He is the founder and executive director of an organization called the Clean Coalition in Menlo Park, California. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here, Tim.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by DinoWatts. If you're a solar PV asset manager or performance engineer, you need better data and better business intelligence. With DinoWatts digital twin benchmarking technology, you get more accurate, efficient, and faster performance measurement results. The fourth generation Dino recently completed a technical review by DNV. You can download the report at dinowatts.com. That's DENOWATTS.com. Now back to the show. You are a somewhat of a well-kept secret in the solar industry, even though you're a veteran and, one of the most experienced solar and storage professionals, bar none, in the United States. It's really been a pleasure to get to know you and learn about your work at the Clean Coalition. Give our listeners a little background on yourself. What were your beginnings and how did you get so interested in renewable energy and microgrids?
Well, the Clean Coalition's mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. And we're a very technical nonprofit. So we do that through engineering and policy activities primarily. I grew up on the technology side of things. I've got a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering, and then followed that up with an MBA. Worked as an electrical engineer for a few years, and then did the MBA. Worked as a commercial banker for a few years, and then got back into the technology side of things, working in wireless telecommunications primarily for some big companies like Qualcomm and Ericsson, and a few startups that people have probably never heard of. But did well enough in the wireless telecommunications side of things that I could really think about what I want to do with the rest of my life. And going back in the early 2000 timeframe, there were a few really significant events that brought out the lifelong environmentalist in me. And those events were, first of all, I lived in San Diego at the time. I'd been working with Qualcomm, and the California, they called it the deregulation, the deregulation, quote unquote, deregulation of the California energy market, electricity market, was really just a different way to regulate. There's no such thing as deregulation. It's just a re-regulation. You're just changing the format. And San Diego was the first market in California to just get completely screwed by the Enrons of the world that were gaming the re-regulated market, the restructured market here in California. And so that just pissed me off. And I did my research, and I determined how that was happening, how the Enrons were gaming the system. And the federal government under George Bush Jr. at the time would not allow California to basically defend itself against this market manipulation, and that just pissed me off. So California had, hundreds of billions of dollars of transfer payments that it basically made to the state of Texas, and that really disturbed me. So that was the first big event that got me thinking about I need to really move into this renewables realm and accelerate this transition to renewable energy. The second was my son was born in 2001, and so that really puts a new perspective on a parent, on a human being, right? When you become a parent, you start looking at the world from what's it going to look like for my kids and my grandkids and the whole lineage beyond, if the world is still here. And so that was the second big event. And then the third big event was that George Bush got reelected in November of 2004. And, up to that point in time, I thought he was about as bad as a US president could get. And, particularly on the environmental side of things and in lots of other ways, right? The war in Iraq and lots of, you pile it on. But until Trump came along, I thought that George Bush Jr. was really bad. Now he's looking super good in comparison, but
it's all relative. It's all relative.
It's all relative. Those were the three big events. And I just said, I need to, I've got enough comfort here financially. I can't retire, but I don't need to worry about where my next, meal is coming from and my next mortgage payment, et cetera. And so I formed the Clean Coalition I got involved in a number of political campaigns, including becoming the energy policy advisor to Steve Wesley, who was running for governor in the 2006 election cycle in California. And so I became his energy policy advisor, put together an amazing energy policy platform that my intention was to get Steve Wesley into the governor's seat, and then to get an appointment in Sacramento, bring all these great policies to state of California, and then proliferate them around the country and beyond, after getting these bellwether policies into California. Anyway, Steve Wesley never made it in the governor's seat, as most people probably know that were at least thinking about politics back in the early 2000s. This name Steve Wesley, people probably don't even know that name, but he was the controller for the state of California, so he had held statewide elected office and is a really good guy still, and still is a really good guy, but he missed his window to become governor. And I went to Plan B, which was to form a very technical nonprofit to bring this policy platform to life through a different pathway other than being an insider policymaker. And so that's basically what the Clean Coalition does today is we work on policy. We still do a lot of policy work, and then the Clean Coalition is a leader on projects and programs that bring solar microgrids and community microgrids to life, to basically show policymakers and everybody else the right way to do things. If you go to a policymaker and you say, hey, here's how you should do things, and you're just describing it in words, and the next people in their face talking to the commissioners at the California Public Utilities Commission, as an example, are from the utilities, which they certainly are. The people that were in the office talking to the commissioner before you was a utility. Are from a utility. The people who are going to be in the office talking to the commissioners right after you are going to be from the utilities. And they're basically telling the commissioners, hey, if the grid comes down, and it will if you do what the Clean Coalition is telling you to do, then there's going to be blood on your hands. People are going to die. There's going to be blood on your hands, right? And so you get these ridiculous, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That basically what happens is the commissioners get scared, and they allow these really disastrous outcomes, like what we just saw in Lahaina, where regulators let the old way of doing things persist. Getting energy over long transmission lines. And then when those lines get blown over, the utility can't shut them off because they're worried about getting electricity to the water pumps to fight the fires And so they let these wires just ignite fires, as they're laying in the brush and in the trees and the bushes and grasses. And then you have Lahaina gets burned down. Whereas if Lahaina had gone with the community microgrid approach, we would have had the ability to just turn those wires off, turn those transmission distribution lines off when you have high winds, and make sure that the critical loads, at the very least, the critical loads can be served by local solar and local energy storage that doesn't require any energy coming from afar, meaning you don't need those wires. So we get these really perverse outcomes and vicious cycles of, okay, we've got these disasters that happen. Utilities are in there knocking on the doors of the commissioners going, we need to build more transmission, even though transmission will not solve that problem. Well, the only thing that transmissions are going to do is going to line the utilities' pockets with more profits because they make such gargantuan returns on investments that they make in transmission. They're guaranteed returns that are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It's not even in the state's hands. So
you've touched on a lot of topics here, Craig. Let me stop you there.
Sure.
And I witnessed the Enron manipulation of energy markets firsthand. I was living in San Diego from 2000 to 2003. It is fascinating how a for-profit, publicly traded company was so influential for so many millions of people in California and other markets. And obviously that was a huge scandal. But I want to shine a light on your work at the Clean Coalition. It is very innovative. If you're not familiar, check it out, Clean Coalition, clean-coalition.org. I think you are on the bleeding edge, truly, of innovating a model for local communities to help them develop affordable microgrids. Everyone loves solar and storage once they learn what it can do. Not everyone can afford solar and storage, and so we need policy innovation. We need incentives at the local, regional, and federal level, and we need more knowledge and information in decision makers' hands, namely politicians, but also, renewable energy developers. So what is this thing, Community Microgrid Initiative, that you have? That's one of your major programs at the Clean Coalition. What is that, and what are the fruits of your labors? If you could give us just a few examples.
Sure. Let's define a microgrid first, and then we'll define a solar microgrid, and we'll finish with the definition of a community microgrid, because those concepts build on each other. So a microgrid, very generically, is a combination of loads. So this is appliances that use electricity. They're generically referred to as loads, combined with a set of energy assets that definitely include the ability to generate energy. So the most simple microgrid that might come to mind for people is basically just a building that has a diesel generator. The grid goes down, that diesel generator kicks on, and it keeps a set of loads operational. And it's usually just a subset of the total number of loads. So just the critical loads will be maintained when that grid goes down and that diesel generator turns on. So a basic microgrid, you got loads, you've got energy assets, and those things are coordinated to work together so that you have energy resilience when the broader grid goes down. Or sometimes a microgrid might be completely detached from any other grid, and it might be 100% of the time it's just self-operating, what's called islanded. It might be 100% of the time it's just islanded. It's never ever connected to a broader grid. A solar microgrid is where the energy generating the energy generation is coming from solar. So that's a solar microgrid. And typically a solar microgrid is going to be serving a single facility that's served by a single meter to the utility. So a solar microgrid is very simply a microgrid that is getting its energy from solar. A community microgrid takes that solar microgrid concept and expands it out to an entire grid area. So think about a neighborhood or a town or even a city or a county. Community microgrids can be very broad. And you're taking that solar microgrid concept, you're bringing it out to a grid area that includes multiple customers of the utility and requires the ability to island sections of a grid when the broader grid goes down. So let's just say if most people think about where they live, your neighborhood, so the whole block of wherever your home is, right? That whole block could be kept could be configured into a community microgrid where you've got enough solar and energy storage working together, so that when the broader grid goes down, we can island that section of the grid where your home is and make sure that the critical loads will stay on forever and the rest of the loads can be maintained for a significant portion of time. So that's the definition of a microgrid, a solar microgrid, and a community microgrid. The Clean Coalition has been involved in dozens of solar microgrids around the country. We've been involved in handfuls of community microgrids around the country. Our very first effort on the community microgrid side was actually in New York following Hurricane Katrina. And that microgrid is called the Long Island Community Microgrid. And it's out in the East Hampton section of Long Island. And there's a lot of information on the Clean Coalition website about that. We've of course, Hurricane Katrina was 10 years ago. So we did that work, many years ago. But that got leveraged into work that we've done in other places, primarily in California, but also up in some island counties off the coast of Washington State, the San Juan County, which has the San Juan Islands. The San Juan County is the San Juan archipelago of islands, and so we've done community microgrid work in a number of places. The first operational community microgrid in California is the Redwood Coast Airport Microgrid, which is in Arcata, California. Right next to Humboldt State University, which actually has changed its name to Humboldt State Polytechnic University. And that is a really ambitious community microgrid that's now been operational for several years. Unfortunately, the California Public Utilities Commission is not being too helpful in making sure that we get the policy innovations that's needed to replicate what we refer to as the RCAM, Redwood Coast Airport Microgrid, and proliferate that into communities across California and beyond. If we had a community microgrid in Lahaina would still be there right now. And unfortunately, there was not a community microgrid in Lahaina, and Lahaina is not there anymore. Community microgrids can deliver the unparalleled trifecta of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits that they bring to communities everywhere.
Yeah.
Rich, poor, in between, doesn't matter. Community microgrids are the solution.
So I love the concept, but I'm also, it's a little fuzzy for me how you've done a lot of work in California in places like the Bay Area, where it's like community up against community up against community. I mean, it's a very developed area. Just looking at the peninsula, for example, or down into the South Bay and around to the East Bay, it's one of the most populated areas in the country. And I can see how, okay, Calistoga, the city of Calistoga gets a microgrid, and maybe that microgrid covers a certain geography, but immediately adjacent to that geography is some other grid What is the future of a microgridded world, so to speak, and what is the difference between what we have today in the vast majority of communities, right? Where, like my city of Champaign-Urbana, we're part of MISO. We're fed by a utility called Ameren. And when the grid goes down, unless you have a home-based microgrid, a solar and battery system and a automatic transfer switch to take you off grid when the grid goes down, you're SOL and you're without power. Fast forward to, let's say, Champaign had a community microgrid that could isolate from the greater grid. That's one of the advantages. And I assume that for the most part, your community microgrids are grid attached for regular operation, and then they go into microgrid mode during some emergency. Is that the case?
That's correct. So on an everyday basis, the community microgrid is generating electricity locally. It's avoiding having to bring energy in from afar, which means you don't have to invest in the transmission infrastructure, which is the most expensive part of the energy system today. And it's the fastest growing component of the energy system is the grid. And the transmission grid in particular is relatively easy to avoid by just making sure that we get more local renewables in place than we have load growth. If you satisfy that very basic requirement or that very basic metric, you don't need to build new transmission infrastructure. And the transmission infrastructure is the utility's biggest cash cow. They get a 12% guaranteed return on equity for transmission investments. And that basically means that it is the ratepayers' most expensive piece of their electricity bill is the transmission grid. So it's a zero-sum game, right? And when we get energy locally, we don't have to get it from afar, and we can avoid all those costs that the utilities are chomping at the bit to heap on ratepayers from building out new transmission. So we've got this economic benefit that we get from community microgrids every day because we're generating electricity and we're avoiding the need to build out transmission infrastructure. And by the way, we're also getting 100% of the energy that gets delivered, or virtually 100% is getting delivered. So you produce it, you deliver it in the same area. You don't have line losses and congestion losses, which account for about 10% on average of the energy that gets delivered in the United States over transmission lines. You'd lose in 10% from line losses and congestion losses. So that's a huge differential. And of course, you're having to take out pristine environments because building a transmission line is like building a road, right? You're messing up pristine environments that you're traversing over. There's a lot of benefits, everyday benefits you get from community microgrids. But Tim, I want to get to the question that you're really getting at, which is when the grid goes down, what happens? Mm-hmm. When the grid goes down, the grid area that has been, that defines the boundary of the community microgrid, however that is connected, you have to look at how the grid is configured, but you put grid isolation switches in the proper places. And when the broader grid goes down, those isolation switches open, which means no energy can flow across them. And now the community microgrid is islanded, and all of the energy that's being generated within it is being coordinated with energy storage and load management solutions to make sure that the most critical loads will never turn off, and the rest of the loads they will be supported as long as they can be given energy availability. But critical loads should never ever turn off. So that's what you're managing the community microgrid to first, is that fire station, those water pumps, the dispatch for emergency services, making sure that critical electric vehicles can be powered, at the heating center, making sure that you've got your efficient heat pump driven HVAC system is operational, right? So you just basically go through and you look at what are the most critical loads for the community, and those are the ones that will never turn off, and then everything else will be prioritized in a sensible way, so that when there is energy available, you keep everything on. Right? If energy is available, everything can stay on as normal. But you have to be able to load manage and shed loads as necessary to make sure there is energy available for those critical loads.
And who is managing the microgrid when you're in microgrid mode or emergency mode? Because obviously that is something that does require some attention. Of course, a lot of it is being done by computers, but you probably also want some human eyeballs on the situation. So how does that work when you're in microgrid mode?
Easy answer is that whatever entity manages the distribution grid, so this is where you're at voltages that are below 70 kV, is a pretty standard demarcation between the distribution grid, which is state jurisdictional, and the transmission grid, which is Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so federal jurisdictional. The transmission grid is federal jurisdictional. When whoever's operating the distribution grid, so it's Ameren in your case there in the Chicago area,
Central Illinois, yeah.
Central Illinois. My apologies. There's probably some competition there between Urbana and Chicago, but in any case, whatever your utility is. So for you, it's Ameren. For me, it's Southern California Edison. That is the utility that operates the distribution grid, and the logical answer is that the distribution system operator, so the utility essentially that operates the distribution system, should be the entity that also operates or they would be the easy entity to be the operator of the community microgrid. Now, if for whatever reason the utility doesn't want to be that party, or if they're so conflicted in terms of they're never going to do it because they just want to keep building transmission, and they believe that building out community microgrids is going to reduce their opportunity to build out more transmission, and they just keep slow rolling things, then the party that owns and operates the community microgrid can be any party. In the case of the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid in California, that the party that owns and operates the community microgrid is the community choice aggregator, which is called the Redwood Coast Energy Authority. RCEA is their acronym. And so when the grid is operating as normal, then it's Pacific Gas and Electric up in that part of California, PG&E. So PG&E, basically owns the grid assets. They own the distribution lines.
Sure.
But when the broader grid goes down, those grid isolation switches open, as I described. And so now we have an islanded community microgrid situation, and control of the community microgrid passes to RCEA, Redwood Coast Energy Authority. And until the broader grid is up and reestablished, operating as normal, the community microgrid stays islanded. And then only when the signal comes in, that the all clear signal comes in, that the broader grid is now ready to operate as normal, then the control is given back to PG&E, and the grid isolation switches are closed again, meaning that community microgrid is no longer islanded. It can share energy resources with the rest of the grid.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more. Yeah, and in a perfect world, 100% of the American population would have access to some kind of a regional microgrid like this for emergency situations. But there are various and sundry barriers to entry for this, money being one, right? Batteries are not cheap, and then there's all this switchgear involved. It's microgrids are not rocket science, but they're not simple either. And some people just run screaming when they hear the word microgrid. But I'm a huge fan. It is, tremendous to have resiliency with a microgrid. So,
Yeah, Tim, I don't know, maybe you're getting to this question, but let me just jump in because I don't want this topic to go left unanswered. The community microgrid approach delivers the best economics to ratepayers possible. And the Clean Coalition has developed a methodology, or I should say a market mechanism called the Resilient Energy Subscription, or RES. We call it RES. We pronounce it as RES because it basically allows ratepayers to make a reservation and pay a fee to say, we want to have resilient energy from a community microgrid, and we're willing to pay a little bit more for a small portion of our electricity to make sure that at least that portion of electricity, call it 100 kilowatt hours. The average house in America uses about 1 kilowatt of power, so 24 kilowatt hours a day, or it's about 30 kilowatt hours a day is kind of the average American home.
yeah.
So if the average home says, okay, well, I don't need 30 kilowatt hours a day, I only need 10 kilowatt hours a day because I just need to make sure that my refrigerator stays operational and my food doesn't go bad, and that I've got access to my Wi-Fi connection and a couple of plug loads so I can keep my computers and phones, powered up. So I only need maybe, 10% or 15% of my normal load, but I'm willing to pay a little bit extra to make sure that on an average day, I will be getting 5 kilowatt hours or 10 kilowatt hours delivered from the community microgrid. And I'm willing to pay a fee for that. And that fee is less than the utilities would go spend to build out a bunch more transmission that wouldn't provide you with any resilience at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's the most effective. Community microgrids are the most cost-effective way to proceed in terms of building out the energy system of the future and deliver this unparalleled trifecta of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits. And I'm going to drop into the chat here, and you're welcome to share with your audience a link to the Resilient Energy Subscription market mechanism.
Okay. So
article.
let's walk through the process. Let's say the city of Champaign decides we want to become a community microgrid, and how do the decision makers pursue that? How do they finance it? And how do ratepayers get involved in that decision-making process, and what are the outcomes?
Yeah, that's great questions, Tim. So the initial step is to determine where the critical community facilities are. And those are the facilities that we want to start with. Those are the facilities that should be mandated on the utilities, that they create solar microgrids and community microgrids that are ratepayer funded. So the critical community facilities should be ratepayer funded because they serve everybody.
So you're talking schools, hospitals, water services, etc.
Emergency sheltering facilities, yes. And then once you have that sunk cost, and by the way, utilities operate under this construct of cost of service. Utilities never lose money. They get to go spend a bunch of money, and then they get to recover their costs with a nice, healthy profit built on top of it. So that's the way the utility industry works. It's called cost of service.
Yeah.
So they get to go build these solar microgrids and community microgrids that are based on cost of service to provide resilience for critical community facilities that all of us rely on. If Lahaina, those water pumps to fight the fires, those are critical community facilities. They would have saved everybody's homes, rich or poor, does not matter.
Mm-hmm.
The hospitals, the fire station, make sure the dispatch is working, right? Those are critical community facilities that help everybody, and they should be ratepayer funded. Once you have that fundamental sunk cost made, the incremental cost to put a little bit of extra solar out there, to make that solar, solar project a little bit bigger, put it on more rooftops or fill up the rooftop. Don't just, get to the net metering limit, fill the whole rooftop up. fill up that parking lot. That parking lot's just sitting there soaking up sun and, heating asphalt. Let's put a little shade on it. And let's get some assets, local solar ready to, power the community microgrid.
Yeah. But so let's say the city has a load of 250 megawatts. You're gonna design a microgrid for, say, 10% of that load, say 25 megawatts, right?
Yeah. Well, let me go back to, you just start with the critical community facilities. So whatever city you want to be using as your example, right? If they have 100 megawatt hours of annual load, the critical community, and I'm not just talking about the city's assets, I'm talking about the whole city, right? Like private, public, municipal, everything, right? 100 megawatt hours, or call it a gigawatt hour. Some percentage of that is critical community facilities. It's probably something like 1 or 2% of that total load is critical community facilities. That's what you build out for, just that 1 or 2%. And then wherever those community microgrids are anchored, because critical community facilities are usually concentrated in specific areas. So you have the hospitals pretty close to a fire station, pretty close to a police station, pretty close to the facility that's running the water treatment and the fresh water, right? They control the water pumps. These types of facilities are generally very concentrated, but you build out those community microgrids and the solar microgrids to serve those facilities. And then the incremental cost to start expanding out from there is very low. And it's because you're only having to worry about upsizing the solar and upsizing the energy storage. The initial cost of getting those initial assets out there is the expensive cost, right? You got a lot of fixed costs in that initial installation, and then it's all incremental investment from there. And so the incremental cost that needs to be collected from the res participants, the participants that are raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm willing to pay a little extra for some resilient energy subscription. That money goes to paying for that incremental cost to build out the community microgrid after you have your seed investments sunk.
It's easy to say ratepayers pay for it. Okay, but the devil is in the details. Like, how does this actually come to fruition? Some amount of money has to be raised on the front end because you're buying major equipment, you're installing batteries, you're installing solar arrays.
It's cost of service. This is when utilities build a new transmission line. Guess how they collect it? It's cost of service. Here's how much it costs.
Oh, okay. So it's literally, instead of building out the grid, they're building a microgrid.
Yes. This is how utilities are some of the wealthiest companies out there, right? But this is how they operate. Everything is cost of service for them.
And you're suggesting that utilities play ball with this?
Look, utilities are, if you're talking about investor-owned utilities, they are subjected to the regulatory compact, which means Mr. or Mrs. Utility, you have been given the right to operate a monopolistic business model, because utilities are monopolies. And the regulatory compact says you're able to operate this monopolistic business model as long as you agree to be regulated by an entity that's looking out for everybody else, mm-hmm. which is you and me, the ratepayers. So the utilities have to do what the regulators tell them. That's the way the regulatory compact works. So what we really need as a first step, Tim, is we need our regulators to make sure that they're doing their jobs effectively and that they're edicting to the utilities to provide the future energy system that's going to provide maximum benefits to all of us in the form of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits.
Yeah. Well, what about public power? What about munis and co-ops?
Well, they one kind of hopes that they are a little bit more proactive than the investor-owned utilities, but the reality is that the munis often are laggards They wait for the investor-owned utilities to make the move and show them how to do it, and then they just follow, right? They're basically followers, typically speaking. There are exceptions, but typically the munis are followers of the investor-owned utilities. So they will follow. You know, if you live in a municipal utility service territory and you go, hey, what the heck's going on here? You know, every time we have a fire, the place burn, you know, we get these massive burn downs because you guys won't turn the power lines off, like in Lahaina. That's what happened in Lahaina. You know, that can't happen, right? So the munis will follow. In a few cases, the munis will lead. But at the end of the day, the munis aren't going to be, you know, they're not going to be 20 years behind the investor-owned utilities. They do have to compete and show that they're worthy of continuing on as in this municipal utility, you know, business model.
And co-ops?
They're the same. I mean, co-ops are basically the same as municipal utilities. That they have elected boards as opposed to you know, being part of you know, being a department of a city type of thing. But you know, their co-ops are not investor-owned utilities. So in that sense, they're very similar to municipal utilities.
And so do you have some kind of an out-of-the-box solution for a you know, a city who decides, you know, we're going to do this. We like what's going on in.
We have a methodology. Clean Coalition has a methodology for developing solar microgrids and community microgrids. And, you know, if it sounds like you might have somebody in mind to go talk to, just send them the link to the Resilient Energy Subscription article that I put into our chat and share that with your listeners, because that is the starting point. To send that to that article is very comprehensive, very colorful, lots of analysis and colorful analysis. We keep things simple, but it's colorful, lots of graphics and whatnot. And people will be able to understand it. And so that's the first step in seeing if we've got a policy champion that's willing to push this forward in any given community.
And do you see certain states where this is happening more than others? Or, I mean, obviously California, it's happening way more than others. And there are various and sundry reasons. I mean, California is a very forward-thinking place politically. It's also a place where energy is expensive. It's also a place where you have lots of natural disasters. And so a great use case for microgrids. But where else do you see this activity bubbling up?
So community microgrids are happening in lots of places. Even surprising places like Florida, right? That's a place that seems like it's, kind of lost its mind in most respects, but they actually have several community microgrids there. Babcock Ranch is the name of one of their community microgrid communities in Florida, and it was a safe haven when the last hurricane went ripping through. I forget which. There's been so many darn hurricanes. I forget what the name of that one was, but it was about 6 months ago, and folks, traveled 50 miles to go get refuge at Babcock Ranch, which the hurricane came right through there. And the place stayed operational, maintained its power, and was a refuge not only for its own residents but for broad swath of Florida. The Tampa has there's another community microgrid in the city of Tampa, which is a municipal utility, by the way. So they did a nice job there and have deployed a community microgrid. There are community microgrids that are happening, in various splotches around the country. And I don't have a list of them at my ready. So the ones that the Clean Coalition is working on specifically are all in California at the moment, other than the one for the San Juan Islands off the coast of Washington State.
So in our last few minutes together, Craig, I mean, this is really wonderful news. I love this concept. I don't have a sense of how easy or hard it is to go from no microgrid to microgrid, right? the energy transition is happening faster than most people are aware. And so, batteries, for example, I say, today a fraction of Americans have a battery in their garage. In 10 years, almost everyone will have a battery in their garage. And in 10 years, maybe half of our communities could be community microgrids. That's totally doable. But what are the linchpins, I guess, that community leaders need to be aware of? And, what can you say to them to push them over the hump and not discourage, let them not be discouraged by the myriad of points of resistance that they might meet?
So local community leaders need to push on state regulatory bodies and legislators and governors, right? How does policy get made in a state? Because at the end of the day, the utility is going to be governed by state level regulations. So that's where the policy innovation is ultimately needed, is at the state level. The municipal leaders, city, county leaders, they need to be screaming like hell to make sure that the state level leaders are putting the policy innovations in place that are needed to force the utilities to deploy community microgrids and allow solar microgrids to proliferate as well. And solar microgrids can be components of a community microgrid. They're a very important component. And so the municipal leaders need to get interested. Well, first of all, they need to be made aware that these solutions exist. And then they need to care enough that they need to scream like hell to the state level policymakers. And then the state level policymakers need to force the utilities. And again, most utilities or investor-owned utilities are under this regulatory compact. If we're dealing with municipal leaders that control municipal utilities, right, then we don't even have to go to the state level, right? We can get action at that local municipal level. So municipal leaders are important because they either have direct control over municipal utility or they have lots of influence by screaming like hell, at the state level policymakers. But that's really that's really what this all starts with, because at the end of the day, we just need the policies in place so that the utilities will move the community microgrids forward in their service territories. That's you need to build these projects out, and that ultimately is going to come down to the utilities either building, owning, and operating, or at least getting out of the way and not preventing some other party from building, owning, and operating.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by Dinawatts. If you're a solar PV asset manager or performance engineer, you need better data and better business intelligence. With Dinawatts' digital twin benchmarking technology, you get more accurate, efficient, and faster performance measurement results. The fourth generation Dino recently completed a technical review by DNV. You can download the report at dinawatts.com. That's DENOWATTS.com. Now back to the show. Very well. Well, check out clean-coalition.org. We'll put a link to the story that Craig's referring to. It's an article that he wrote, and we'll put a link in the show notes, so look for that. How can our listeners contact you, Craig?
Well, I would say the best way to contact me is to send me an email. And my email address is very simple. It's craig@clean-coalition.org. And if you are going to send me an email, be very specific about what it is you're interested in talking about, and make sure I've got your full contact record in the email, and good times to reach you back by phone. That's usually if you send an email to me and you're descriptive about what you want to discuss, then I can get back to you and we can have a very efficient conversation without having to spend a lot of time scheduling and dealing with a bunch of loosey-goosey conversation. Clean Coalition gets a lot of inquiries from lots of places, so I do always appreciate when somebody contacts me with a good amount of specificity, and I will be responsive in those instances.
Excellent. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. That helps others find this content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and tell your friends about the show. We're dropping 2 interviews. We're dropping 1 pre-recorded interview and 1 news roundup with my co-host John Weaver at PV Magazine every Thursday. So check out cleanpowerhour.com. I'm Tim Montague. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and via email, tim@cleanpowerhour.com. I want to thank Craig Lewis, the founder and executive director of the Clean Coalition, for coming on the show and for all your work across the United States. Craig, it's really inspirational, and I'm super excited to see this model grow.
Pleasure to be here, Tim. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care. Hey, listeners. This is Tim. I want to give a shout out to all of you. I do this for you twice a week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate you and what you're all about. You are part and parcel of the energy transition, whether you're an energy professional today or an aspiring energy professional. So thank you. I want to let you know that the Clean Power Hour has launched a listener survey, and it would mean so much to me if you would go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on the About Us link right there on the main navigation. That takes you to the About page, and you'll see a big graphic, Listener Survey. Just click on that graphic, and it takes just a couple of minutes. If you fill out the survey, I will send you a lovely baseball cap with our logo on it. The other thing I want our listeners to know is that this podcast is made possible by corporate sponsors. We have 2 wonderful sponsors today, Chin Power Systems, the leading 3-phase string inverter manufacturer in North America, and Dynawatts, a performance monitoring platform for utility scale solar. So check out CPS America and Dynawatts. But we are very actively looking for additional support to make this show work. And you see here our media kit with all the sponsor benefits and statistics about the show. You know, we're dropping 2 episodes a week. We have now over 320,000 downloads on YouTube, and we're getting about 45,000 downloads per month. So this is a great way to bring your brand to our listeners, and our listeners are decision makers in clean energy. This includes project executives, engineers, finance, project management, and many other professionals who are making decisions about and developing, designing, installing, and making possible clean energy projects. So check out cleanpowerhour.com, both our listener survey on the About Us and our media kit, and become a sponsor today. Thank you so much. Let's grow solar and storage. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 3-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes 3-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chinpowersystems.com to find out more.